Today we're starting kind of a short 6-week series and some Old Testament stories, Daniel and the lion's den, David and Goliath. And so these stories are often kind of billed as children's stories, but we miss a lot of the sticky stuff as we kind of sanitize kind of the blood and stuff that happens in some of these stories. And most importantly, oftentimes we miss the bullseye of the story, who is Jesus. And so, what we're going to see over the next few weeks is these stories don't provide heroes that we try to be. That's oftentimes how we've preached these in the past. So whenever Goliath comes in your life, here's how you sling your stone. Like, no, that's not really the point of that story, okay? The point of the story is Jesus. So these stories don't provide heroes that we try to be, but point to a Savior who we desperately need. And I'm going to confess something out the gate, too, this morning. Every time I'm so shocked at how relevant and applicable these stories are. Like, as I've been in the text this morning, this week, this morning too, but as I've been in the text this week, this old thousands of years story is so applicable to us in Fort Worth in 2026. And so we're in Daniel 3 today. If you want to go ahead and turn there or scroll there, no shame. And if you need the table of contents today, that's okay. Daniel chapter 3. Today we'll look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Every time somebody says Abednego, an angel loses its wings. Okay, so let's say it right. All right, so what you'll remember about these men probably, if you know the story at all, is they're going to be thrown into the fiery furnace, but they don't burn up. Not even a hair on their head is singed. And so whether you grew up in the church and you kind of know this story a little bit, or you don't even get the joke about Abednego, okay? Wherever you are in this journey, I really want you to love the Old Testament. I really want you to see it for what it is. And I've told this before, but in seminary I took this class called hermeneutics, where this professor, this professor showed how all of the Bible points to God's grace in our lives and how consistent the Bible's message really is. For a long time, I kind of thought that God in the Old Testament was just a little bit different, maybe a little bit angrier back then, and then his son kind of came into the story, and he had a tie-dye t-shirt on, went off to Berkeley, and kind of showed his dad what grace and love and hope was all about. That was kind of my impression of the entire Bible, of the Old Testament especially, and then I started reading it. Okay, it's amazing what happens then. And I started seeing how in the Old Testament, in Deuteronomy, for instance, that the whole thing is about how God is after our hearts. And he's been about grace from the very beginning, that the law is grace. How in Genesis 3:15, as soon as we sinned, as soon as we turned our back on God's way, right then God promised a seed, already promising that Jesus would come to save us one day. So far from my assumed impression of the Old Testament, the Bible shares one clear story. God loves you and he'll do anything to save you. Over and over again, that's what we see. From Genesis to Revelation, we see a God who steps into the fire on our behalf to rescue us. And that's really the headline of our story today. The story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is one of the most inspiring and relevant accounts in all of the Bible, and it points directly to Jesus. So, this story before we get into the text in Daniel 3, the story takes place in Babylon, if you're not familiar with Babylon. It was a very pagan city, Babylon put Vegas to shame, What happened in Babylon stayed in Babylon, but it was it was wild, But also, so the best way I could describe it is Babylon was like if Vegas and North Korea had a baby. Because wild nights, wild culture, and oppressive dictators. It's this strange thing. That's what it was like. And so quite a place. So today we'll be in 6th century BC, 600 years before Jesus. Babylon was the preeminent power in the world, the dominant empire. They were conquering people and lands left and right into their kingdom. And so part of Babylon's strategy when they would conquer another land, they would go take over another country, was to take the professional class of that people and bring them into Babylon. So when you conquer a people, they don't just automatically hoist a new flag in their front yard and start cheering for a different Olympics team. They don't happily change their allegiance at the heart level. And so Babylon, when they would conquer somebody, they would take the scholars and the people in government, the military officers out of that country, the artisans out of that country they conquered, bring them to Babylon and try to make them Babylonians culturally, right? And so that the conquered people will not try to rebel against them in the future. So the strategy was subjugation through assimilation, So if you take leaders of that culture and put them into your culture, in a generation or two, they will assimilate. They will lose their culture and their values and bring on our culture and our values. So they will eventually stop resisting the ways of the empire. In a generation or two, they like Babylonian food, speak the language, etc. So it was a strategic thing that Babylon was doing. So that's why our three guys are in Babylon in this story. So they were Hebrew, right? Followers of Yahweh, and they were taken out of their home country and being forced to assimilate. Look at Daniel 3, verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials, all of his guys in government of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then all those guys, the officials of the provinces, look at the end of the verse there, gathered for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up, verse 4, and the herald proclaimed aloud, all right, all of you, you're commanded, O peoples, nations, languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, when you hear that, you are to immediately fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning, fiery furnace. Therefore, as soon as they heard it, the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, every kind of music, everybody complied. All the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. The grass withers and the flowers fade, but the word of our God will stand forever. So the king made this huge 90 by 9, golden image and statue. And as soon as the band played, everybody had to bow, you see that there, to the statue, or else they would be cast into the fiery furnace. That was the law now, okay? But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were devoted to God, right, to Yahweh, and so now they're about to face a ton of pressure from the king, from leadership, from society. And, we'll talk about this today, but not to necessarily turn away from Yahweh, but to kind of add him on to the other deities. That's the call. And so Babylon, like the United States and the rest of the West today, believed in many gods, right? Not just one God. And so as Babylon was now a major world city with lots of different kinds of people, as they kept conquering lands and adding new deities into kind of the pile, the king just kept adding new religions into the mix. And it was unacceptable to say, I will not worship all of the gods, just the one true God, which kind of sounds familiar to me. Like in ancient Rome, another kind of great pluralistic society, great in the sense of big. Ancient Rome, they would say, you Christians are dangerous. You threaten the social order because you won't honor all the deities. And in the West today, we hear, you Christians are dangerous. You threaten the social order because you won't honor all identities. Kind of the same call, right? And so all three of our guys are being forced to kneel to a statue that represented all of the Babylonian gods. Now, that was not a picture, the Polaroid didn't exist, that's not a real picture but that's about what it looked like, okay? And so imagine that this concrete, huge, right in the middle of town, everybody saw it. The statue was surrounded, of course, like you saw, with orchestras and placed in the middle of the most public place. So anytime the music began, everyone had to bow and worship the image. And of course, our three guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, would not bow to the golden statue. They refused. And so some haters kind of told on him in verse 12. They go to the king and they're like, hey, king, so there are certain Jews right over there, okay, whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, they pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. So King Nebuchadnezzar knows these guys, okay, they serve in his government. And so he goes to him in verse 14, he goes, hey, is that true, guys? Guys, that you don't serve my gods by worshiping the golden image that I've set up? And they know exactly the consequences. They know what's going to happen next. They're not surprised by anything that's happening now. And it's interesting, okay? So in the whole chapter, the statue is never given a name, you see. So if you read all of Daniel 3, you may think it represents some sort of particular Babylonian god, but it's never given a name. Again, the Babylonians had a number of gods, and as they would conquer new lands, they would add new deities into the mix. And so this 90-foot golden image doesn't represent just one god, but all of them. Okay, so it represents the values really in the culture of Babylon, of that city. Essentially, it's the god of pluralism. What he's saying to everybody is, King Nebuchadnezzar is saying, I'm not asking you to worship just my gods or just the Babylonian gods. Instead of your gods, I'm asking you to worship the Babylonian gods in addition to your gods. Okay, so, what he's saying is you can worship your God in private. That's fine. You can have your little meetings, okay, that's fine, okay, but in public, you better bow to the image. You can worship your God as long as you don't say your God is the only God, which all that sounds a little familiar to me these days, and so it's almost exactly what we're told today. Privately, fine, okay, worship your God, hold your values, but don't you dare bring that into the public square. Bow to pluralistic values or else. Right? So, or else you can't teach here, you can't report the news here, you can't work here, all these different sorts of things. And so our three guys, they could worship Yahweh in private, but in public, they had to behave like everybody else. The values, the way you live needs to be like everybody else. So here's what we learn, okay? All great pluralistic societies across history, Babylon, Rome, United States, all these, they all do the same thing. Okay, the pressure is the same. All pluralistic societies across history do the same thing. You can worship privately however you want, but public culture, you got to be like everybody else. Don't think that your religion has some exclusive claim. Don't do that in the public square. That's really not okay. And so, even saying all religions are the same is an exclusive claim. That's another subject for another day. But again, this is how all pluralistic cultures work. It assimilates you into the larger culture by making you privatize your faith. It assimilates you into the larger culture by making you privatize your faith. So I'll give you a couple of examples of what this might look like today. So let's say you're in the corporate business world in Fort Worth, a lot of great big corporations here, and let's say the people are ruthless, and they're ruthless in their business practices. Some of what they do is just kind of barely legal, and that puts a tremendous amount of pressure on you because they're competitors, they're colleagues, and so kind of to keep up, you start bending and breaking as well. So if you're a Christian, you decide, I need to be as ruthless as everybody else if I'm going to make it, then you succumb to the pressure. You bow to the image. Your faith is private, and you've assimilated into the culture. You say that you believe the Christian doctrines, but when it comes to actually living out your faith, you're kind of like everybody else. Another example, if you're raising a family in our culture where success is defined by achievement and status and accumulation, there's a pressure to organize your life around what impresses people, even if it slowly crowds out obedience and generosity and simplicity. So instead of rejecting public pressure to keep up with the Joneses, to say no to certain things so that you could have family dinners and always be, prioritize Sunday worship, you overwork, overcommit, and spend all your time on things that just aren't going to last. And so you don't reject God, but you just kind of quietly reorder your priorities, and what you end up trusting is not God, but what everybody else is trusting in that ladder that we're all trying to climb, right? So, or last example, if you're in a social circle or a school or an organization where faithfulness to Scripture on sexuality and gender is seen as outdated and offensive, there's this real pressure to soften what you believe, to make sure nobody feels uncomfortable around that belief. And so you start editing your convictions in real time, to make sure, that everybody is kind of on the same page. So you hold your beliefs privately. Of course, you don't practice such things, but you kind of just hold your beliefs privately, but you stop having a voice in the public square. And over time, your Christianity becomes something that you carry privately instead of confessing publicly. You still believe in God, but when it comes time to stand, you bow, All pluralistic cultures have done what we've done in America today. You can worship your God privately, but don't bring your narrow ideas into the public square. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have none of it, okay? If you read the book of Daniel, you'll know that these aren't just guys in a tiny spiritual enclave. They're not like monks who are detached from society, they're like, what are these guys doing? No, King Nebuchadnezzar pretty clearly knows who these guys are. They're maybe even kind of high up in the local government. They're deeply involved in the culture of Babylon. They've received a Babylonian education. They're all working in public service. They're deeply involved, deeply engaged. They're very much a part of the city. They're doing what we're encouraged to do in Jeremiah 29:7, as exiles, to love the city, to pray for the city, to seek the prosperity of the city, to be for the city. That's why city is our middle name. We're for the city as a church. And so they're all in on that. They're making Babylon better, but when they're asked to privatize their faith and bow to the image, they refuse, absolutely refuse, no matter what the consequences are. And I really believe today that you're under the same social pressure that they were under. Not to be killed physically, thank God, I'm not taking it there, but the social pressure is absolutely the same. And if you don't sense that, there's a chance that you're bowing to it. If we're never taking it on the chin for any of these sorts of things, there's a chance that you're bowing to the pressure. And resisting isn't just reposting a bunch of stuff on your story. That's fine, okay? But resisting is living out your faith when it costs you something. Resisting is refusing to lie, cheat, steal at work like everybody else. It's living out God's standard for sex within marriage instead of bowing to the image that the world sets before us, believing what God says. It's being so convinced that God's way is best that you're willing to stand when everybody else is bowing. We're not against the culture at all, okay? We're not trying to put anyone down, quite the opposite. We were sent here to make Fort Worth more like heaven. Okay, that's what we're doing, which is what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were doing. They were making Babylon better, but they refused to bow. So ask yourself today, are there ways that I'm bowing to the culture's demands? Are there areas that I've just kind of accepted that I have to bow to the image instead of standing up to pressure? Okay, let's keep going in the story, verse 15. So, the haters told on him. King Nebuchadnezzar's like, hey, what's going on here? And so now it keeps going. So King Nebuchadnezzar says in verse 15, now, all right, guys, if you're ready, all right, when you hear, I'm going to give you a second chance. When you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, fall down and worship the image that I've made. Well and good, all good. We won't worry about that first time. It'll be well and good for now. But if you do not worship, immediately you'll be cast into the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Somebody that powerful? Yeah, right. Verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. I ain't got nothing to say to you. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden statue that you've set up." We believe that God wants to save us. We believe that he has the power, absolutely. But if he doesn't, that's okay. No matter what the consequences are, we will not bow to the pressure that you're giving to us right now. Whether or not we follow God does not depend on if he meets our demands. They're saying fire or no fire, I'm going to trust God. Fire or no fire, I will believe in God. I will stand firm. Fire or no fire, I will speak God's truth. I know God is for me. Fire or no fire, I will lay down my life for the sake of God's kingdom. I can't tell you how many times as a pastor, somebody said some version of the following to me. Man, I trusted God. I waited on God. I lived a good life. And then I asked him for some really important things and he didn't come through, so I'm out. I asked God for this, I obeyed, and I was going to church, but then he didn't meet so I'm going back to sin. I'm doing it my own way. Well, you didn't really trust God. You trusted God if. So that's not what they're doing. They don't say, oh yeah, king, well, we trust God if. No, they trust God, period. No matter what happens next, we're not bound to that image. No matter what happens next, we're not going to act like all of these gods are God. We know the one true God. They're believing in God, and as a result, they can face anything, and that really makes the king furious, as you can imagine. Verse 19 says that he was filled with fury, and he wants the furnace to match his fury, to be as hot as his fury was. So King Nebuchadnezzar had his servants make the furnace 7 times hotter than it already was, and then he bound up the guys, and he's getting ready to toss them in there. It was so hot, the furnace was so hot that the soldiers who tossed him in died, even by getting close to the furnace. And so then the king goes to a high place as they're being thrown in so he can see what's happening, which is pretty twisted. He wants to see them, being tortured. And the king sees 2 shocking things from the high place. First, he sees the 3 guys just walking around, unbound and just kind of, just having a good time. Okay, and then, what in the world? The king notices there's 4 men in the furnace now. He's like, what in the world? I thought we threw 3 in there. How many dudes did we throw in there? I see 4, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. See the end of that verse. If that don't make you shout, get up out of here, man. So next week in the lion's den, the king's going to thank God that God sent his angel to save Daniel. And here today we see that angel deliver again. And I'm confident, and plenty of scholars have said this, but I'm confident that this angel was Jesus himself. That's what I think is in the fire. It's a pre-incarnate manifestation of Jesus himself, the Son of God, was in the fire with his people. You know, our God, when we're in the fire, he doesn't just send a telegram, he comes himself. When we were facing the ultimate penalty forever and ever, and we couldn't pay for our sin, he didn't just send somebody else. He came himself, died on the cross in our place, was buried and rose again for us. King Nebuchadnezzar, he's totally shocked. And so he's like, all right, guys, well, come on back out, I guess, you know. And the men's hair wasn't even singed. And King Nebuchadnezzar said, no other God is able to save like this. We have all these gods, we got all these ideas, but none of these gods that this golden statue represents can do this right here. And now that was a true statement. There is no other God who walks through the fire with his people. There is no other God who walks through the fire for his people. The Son of God, Jesus, took on our suffering and death on the cross to rescue us from suffering and death. He walked through the fire on the cross, you know. He provided rescue when it seemed like the fire of our sin would burn us up. You know, these men did not have the power to save themselves like we did not have, like we were powerless to save ourselves from sin, so Jesus made a way when there was no way. One really interesting pattern we see in the Bible. You know, God could have saved them before they went into the furnace. We understand that, right? He could have avoided some of this drama, you know. So why didn't God save Daniel before he was in the lion's den? You ever notice, you know that story, whenever Peter walks on water? So the disciples, Jesus sends them out. It was his idea to go out into the water. And these disciples, they're on a small boat in a big storm. No flashlights, nothing. So they think they're going to die. Winds are swirling, torrential rain. And all of a sudden, they think as a ghost kind of walks up on them and they shriek, okay? And then Jesus says, hey, it's me, guys, it's me. Again, no flashlight, okay? You ever try to see through a storm? What is that? And so Jesus goes, it's me. And Peter goes, if it's really you, Jesus, call me out there. And Jesus goes, come on. Peter's like, oh, shoot, okay. So he actually gets out of the boat and he starts walking. But notice in the text, next time you read that story, it says, so Peter turned back in doubt. It says, and sinking a little bit, then Jesus pulled him up. Why did Jesus do that? He's done it to me. I don't know about you. And sinking a little bit, Jesus pulls him up out of the water. He's like, don't you see, my child? Don't you see what I've done for you? Trust me. Don't live in fear. Don't live in shame. Trust me. Whatever your trial is, just because you're in the fire doesn't mean God isn't there. Just because this isn't working out like you wanted it to doesn't mean God has abandoned you. You know, you may feel like nothing can bring you out of your current circumstance. God can. And he may let you go through the fire, whatever it looks like, but he absolutely can. He saved Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from the furnace. He caused the sun to stand still in Joshua. He tore down the walls of Jericho. He's able to tear down the walls that divide, to bring back delight in your life. What is impossible with man is possible with God. You know, you will feel Jesus walking with you in the furnace to the degree that you know that Jesus was thrown into the ultimate furnace on your behalf. As that sinks more deeply and deeply into your heart. You know, the gospel is that we're sinners who deserve to be thrown into the furnace, but Jesus Christ came to earth and experienced God's wrath on our behalf. He was thrown into the furnace on our behalf, the furnace that we deserved. And so when we believe in him, none of that wrath comes to us, you know. He suffered, not that I might always avoid suffering, but he suffered so that he could suffer for me and now with me. So Jesus wants to walk through the furnace with you. And in just a minute, you'll have the opportunity to come down and pray with a prayer partner. And so, you know, if there's something that you're experiencing in your life that you need prayer for, in just a moment, you'll have the opportunity to come and pray with a prayer partner. Or maybe somebody in your family is going through something, and you're at a point to where I can't, like Jasmine was saying, I can't control what I really want to control, so I just want to give this to God a little bit more. Caleb, you can come on up. I love preaching Old Testament stories in light of Easter. You know, like Pastor Jeffrey said, we celebrate Easter every Sunday, that Jesus is alive today. And, you know, if Jesus doesn't come back from the dead, the Bible is just another book from some world religion. But since Jesus came back from the dead, this is different from any book of any old religion across the world that has a dead God. Okay, because Jesus is on every page. In Genesis, he's the breath of life and the promised seed. In Exodus, he's the Passover lamb. In Leviticus, he's the fire by night. In Numbers, he's a faithful guide. In Deuteronomy, he's the covenant mediator. In Joshua and Judges, he's the lawgiver and righteous deliverer. In Ruth, a kinsman redeemer. In 1 and 2 Samuel, he's a trusted prophet. Kings and Chronicles, he's sovereign. In Ezra, he's a covenant renewer. Nehemiah, city restorer. In Job, he's a timeless redeemer. In the Psalms, Jesus is our morning song. In the Proverbs, he's wisdom incarnate. In Ecclesiastes, he is our true satisfaction. In the Song of Solomon, he's a loving bridegroom. In Isaiah, he's the Prince of Peace. Jeremiah, Jesus is the weeping prophet for Israel. Ezekiel, he is forever faithful. Joel, he is the Spirit outpourer. Amos, he's the arms that carry us. In Obadiah, he is the Lord, our Savior. In Jonah, he's the great missionary. In Micah, he's the peaceful ruler. In Nahum, he is the just judge. Zechariah, our pierced king. In Malachi, Jesus is the Son of God rising with healing in his wings. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, he is our Messiah, long foretold. In the book of Acts, he's the fire from heaven. In Romans, he is righteousness revealed. In Corinthians, he unleashes a spirit-empowered church. That's you. In Galatians, freedom giver. Ephesians, grace. Colossians, he is supreme Lord. In Thessalonians, he is the coming king. Timothy and Titus, he's our blessed hope. In Hebrews, he's the great high priest. Peter, our living hope. 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, Jesus is our true love. In Jude, he's our defender. In the book of Revelation, he is the King of kings, Lord of lords, and when time is no more, he is. Every page of this book is about Jesus, who was, who is to come. And he has all this prepared just for you so that you can know when you're in the furnace, when you're facing the shame of your own sin, he's with you.